What's the darkest secret someone accidentally revealed in front of you? My mom's cousin got drunk at her house one night and told us about how his neighbor, who owned a trailer park, hired him to clear out a trailer that was left behind by a hoarder, an animal hoarder. He said that the trailer was full of cats and dogs, as well as cages of cats and dogs. Some had had babies, so there were kittens and puppies that had never known freedom. All the animals were trapped inside the trailer and were starving. His solution? Call a rescue for help? Anyone? Animal control even? Nope. He started offing them. He said that when he opened the door, a bunch tried to run out, so he offed them. Then, to stop them from escaping, he attacked them through the windows. While telling us, he was laughing about how many animals there were and how many times he had to reload his gun. The neighbors at the trailer park called the police, and he said he had permission to do this from the property owner, so they left him to it. Then he was out of shells. The whole trailer was covered in bodies and filth. He deemed it unsalvageable, so he made the logical decision to set the trailer on fire. He said that the fire took care of the rest of the animals. He could hear them screaming. He was annoyed that the fire didn't go out as fast as he wanted the job done and complained about getting his pants wet in the woods while running when the neighbors called the fire department. He laughed about how mad his neighbor, the trailer park owner, was about him causing a scene and that she had wanted him to take care of it more quietly, so I don't know what she even wanted. She sounded horrible too. She told me to take care of it, and boy, I sure did. He is in jail right now, unrelated, not without my efforts. I recorded his whole rant and gave it to the police. F him. I hope he's someone's flashlight. Story 2. A friend revealed that he secretly kept files on people he knew in a filing cabinet in his bedroom. I pretended to be fascinated and asked to borrow mine so I could copy it. It contained letters I had written, pages of scribbled notes about conversations, and a complete record of who had worked for him and when. There were also notes about my mother and some sketchy notes about my sister. I burned the file and never saw him again. What a creep. Story 3. When I was 14, my parents managed a retirement community. My best friend and I had gone to my parents' work to help with a Memorial Day ceremony, where one of the last WWI veterans was going to be honored as the oldest surviving WWI soldier in the state we lived in. As my BFF and I, two teenage girls, were sitting in the shade putting together party favors, the veteran who was to be honored came over and told us he had something to share. He proceeded to tell us that he was not the oldest surviving WWI veteran at all. In fact, he was the youngest. He enlisted when he was 13 years old and lied about his age because his brother had been drafted, and their mother didn't want him to go alone. His older brother passed away immediately in combat. When this man returned home, he would not have been able to receive any veterans' assistance, which was desperately needed for his family, because he had lied about his age. He and his mother had no choice but to declare that it was he who had died in combat. He lived the rest of his life using his brother's identity in order to receive disability benefits. He was missing a couple of limbs and had severe PTSD. He explained that he had never told anyone this secret. His wife and children had no idea. Literally, two selfish, spoiled teenage girls who are now in their late 40s have kept this man's secret. Having now worked in the senior living field for 30 years, this wasn't the most shocking secret I've heard. It was, however, the most impactful. I honestly didn't process the gravity of the situation until about 10 years later. I believe he confided in us because we were around the same age as he was when this all happened, and we triggered some memories by being two boneheaded teens. There was definitely a vulnerability shared between the three of us. In our 30s, we visited his grave because we were so impacted as we matured, and by the seriousness of his actions, we questioned how many other veterans' tombstones had the wrong information. Story 4. My stepdad was the youngest of 9 kids, and the oldest was his sister, who was 20 years older than he was. My stepdad was born in 1936, so his sister was born in 1916. She was a schoolteacher, and she never married. I think that, at the time, it wasn't uncommon for a schoolteacher to remain unmarried and dedicate her life to her career, the old spinster schoolmarm trope as it was. I think she started teaching sometime in the 1930s and then retired in the 1970s, probably around the time my stepdad met my mom. Anyway, fast forward to 1983 when I was about 19, she stopped by the house while I was there alone. We sat in the kitchen, drank coffee and chatted. Then, out of the blue, she confessed to me why she had never married or had children. Years ago, she was babysitting for a local family, and after the parents came home, the father offered to drive her home. Except he didn't drive her home. He parked inside a barn on a local farm, dragged her inside, and essayed her. She started to cry as she told me. She said she had kept the secret inside since 1930 when it happened, and that she had never told a soul. She never told the police, her family, or anyone else. It had eaten away at her for the 53 years since it happened. She had kept it locked away inside. She begged me not to tell my stepdad, my mom, or anyone else in the family. She said that since she was a teacher, it was kind of a good cover for why she had never married or had a family. People simply chalked it up to the way society viewed her job back then. But the real reason was the trauma she suffered. She never really had a boyfriend or any kind of romantic life because of the attack. I kept her secret, even after she died in 1998 at 82. My stepdad, being the youngest of the 9 siblings, died at 86 in 2022, and I never told him. As I promised her, I never told a soul. Story 5. My dad came to stay with me for a few weeks while on vacation from his job. We had been estranged for the better part of 10 years, and everything seemed to go really well. We hung out a lot, reminisced, watched movies, and all around had a good time. On one of the last days of his stay, I had a few friends come over to meet him. We all got to drinking, and my dad was pretty drunk when he admitted that he and my mom didn't like me when I was a kid. He said they had argued over who was going to take me in during the divorce. My mom was the one who ended up with my brothers and me. I asked him why they didn't like me, and he got quiet for a while. I asked him again, but he pretended like he didn't know what I was talking about. I was really confused, hurt, and embarrassed. To this day, he says he doesn't remember saying that. Story 6. I guess not an accident, but not once, but twice. I had two different best friends tell me they were having affairs while their wives had just given birth to newborn babies. Not just random cheating, but full-on separate life affairs. What's even more insane is that I'm the type of guy who, if someone says want to hear a secret, I say no. If they say promise not to tell anyone, but I cut them off and tell them I'm not interested. I hate secrets, gossip, all of it. I'm not interested, ever. Why they chose to tell me with zero warning, both times trapped in a car with them, I have no idea. Gross stuff. These were my absolute best friends at the time. I'm not friends with either of them anymore. Story 7. In my early 20s, I went to another state to visit my buddy who was working out of town. He had a random guy from work with him. We were all blue-collar workers, and they were there doing iron work, so everyone on the job was from out of town. We went out for breakfast and then spent a few hours just driving around dirt roads, checking out the Idaho countryside. The conversation eventually steered into locker room talk when, out of nowhere, the guy in the back seat decided to tell us he had once picked up an intoxicated older woman walking home from a bar and essayed her after she refused to do what he wanted during the ride. He then said he left her stranded in the woods in Oklahoma. We were both instantly disgusted and thought, wow, you're a real piece of crap. The hour-long drive back to town was awkward as hell. That guy, story 8, worked at Target as an 18-year-old, I was on break, and a Jerry Springer-type show was playing in the break room. Older male coworkers started laughing and joking about a guy on the show who was in the hot seat, and apparently dating a woman who was 18 and younger than his own daughter. They first talked about how they could never do that, but then came comments about how it was all technically legal. Cue another coworker I'll never forget, a woman in her 50s, sitting by herself. She started confronting them, talking about how it was disgusting to joke about and excuse any man who could have eyes for someone that young and in the age range of his own daughter. The male coworkers began defending themselves, saying they didn't support it. It was just how some men are sometimes. This was the worst thing they could have said. She slammed the table, stood up in a rage, and began to have a meltdown. She talked about how that 18-year-old is a little girl, and how men are always excusing the behavior of other men, pushing, poking, and playing their little games with little girls until they get what they want. She said that men who don't have issues with dating an 18-year-old are the same men who won't have issues with 18-year-olds deep down, and that it will never be enough for them. They will keep pushing and excusing things behind closed doors. Then, in vivid detail, she blurts out about how years ago, her father always tried to push her more and forced her to play his little games at night. Then she ended up getting belly, and how her mother got her to have it terminated secretly and did nothing but shame her instead. She said a lot more, but I think at 18 I was checking out mentally at that point. Story 9, my biological father is a horrible person and lied to my mom about being married before her. He had been married once that she knew of, as she was basically raising his neglected children. Their biological mom was on a bender, in and out of prison, so somehow my dad got custody. But she said she'd never marry a man who had been divorced more than once. His mom told her on their wedding day, not knowing she didn't know. Well, that wasn't even the biggest part. Throughout my entire life, he hid his first wife extremely well and absolutely refused to talk about her at all. He wouldn't even give a name. He would go as far as threatening your life or pushing for answers. Surprise, he's a heavy drinker and mixed it with different drugs, which only made him more violent. Somehow, he manipulated me into coming to pick him up, and without any provocation, while he was lying in the backseat just saying random things, he told me his wife's name and that there was another child. So I asked what happened, and he said, "You don't want to know." Then it was just dead silent. After a minute or so, he grabbed me between my shoulder and neck while I was driving and told me that if I told my mom anything, he would off me. Not the first or last time that threat would come up. I just felt that it was so creepy and chilling to hear. I only got her first name, but I've been searching for a while for any hint of who this woman was, why my dad was so secretive about her, and what happened to their child. Anyways, F you, Bill. I can't wait to dance on your grave. Story 10. I met this girl in one of my college classes who tried to befriend me. She was a little off, but she seemed nice, and I was very lonely, still am, so we went to dinner a couple of times. For the purpose of this story, it's important to note that I'm a trans man and she's a trans woman. Over the course of the dinners, she would say really weird and frankly misogynistic things about cis women, trans men, and anyone with a V. She would talk about how they were out to get her and how they were always making things up to get her in trouble. We're almost 20, so that was weird phrasing, but I was willing to hear her out because we all have our own experiences. However, she just kept coming back to how people with V were terrible, hysterical, and whatever else. Always the V-havers. She kept hinting at a dark backstory where all of the they fabs had conspired to kick her out of her old college, the top trans-supportive college in the country, purely because she was a trans woman. I knew there was something more to it, but I didn't really care enough to find out. One day I encountered her, and she looked awful, like she hadn't slept at all. I asked her if she was okay. She then revealed that the reason she was kicked out of her old college was because she had been accused of SA, and the mean rumors had followed her. She simply couldn't understand why all these wussies were making stuff up to make her sad. I proceeded to distance myself from the relationship as quickly as possible, but she still tries to talk to me when she sees me. Maybe it truly was a false accusation, and she just became bitter about it, but I'm not willing to gamble my bodily autonomy to find out. Story 11. My ex's 7-year-old brother asked, "Where's Candy?" At the first family get-together I was invited to. I brushed it off as the kid asking where my ex's ex was. A year later, the kid was showing me a family tree he made for school that he had hung on his wall. I noticed there was a photo missing and some writing had been erased underneath it. Little kids tend to press very hard when they write, so I was able to make out that Candy and my ex were supposed to be getting married that May, just 1 month after he and I started dating. My ex admitted that he was still engaged to Candy while we were actively going on dates to get to know each other. He said he only broke it off once he knew I was worth pursuing. Story 12. I remember riding in the car with my aunt and my mom. I was in the back seat. She and my mom were talking about her new boyfriend who happened to have a kid. I remember her saying, "And what am I supposed to do about that? I don't even love my own kids." I've never forgotten that. And I have never liked my aunt after that. Story 13. My uncle admitted to me that he once had an affair with a woman in another state and had a child with her. Shortly after the child was born, they both died in a car accident. He basically saw this as a blessing as it meant his wife wouldn't find out. Yeah, he's a piece of crap. They ended up divorcing anyways a few years later for other reasons. I'm the only one in my family that knows. Story 14. Not revealed, but found out I was the secret. My father divorced my mother when I was very young and had contact whenever he could muster the effort to make an appearance every couple of years or so, filled with empty and broken promises. Nevertheless, I loved him and missed him. After becoming a father myself, I decided to forge and maintain a relationship with him over the last decade or so. We grew closer, and he got to know his grandchildren during their younger years much more than he ever knew me, and I was grateful for it. For them, I got the news that my father had passed away from his neighbor. When I quietly attended his funeral, the family was absolutely shocked and blindsided that I was his son, at 40 years old, and by how uncannily similar we looked. I had no idea my father had 9 brothers and sisters, or that I had 3 sisters and 3 brothers, one of whom had already passed away. Nobody knows why I was kept a secret from them, or why they were kept a secret from me. But my children now have an amazing new branch of the family tree to climb, explore, and cherish. Story 15. One of the secretaries in the regional office of my employer is an old friend of my mother. She's also the arch-enemy of the other secretary in that office. 3 years ago, she was complaining about the other secretary's attitude and said she blames everything on being abandoned as a child and adopted, but you were too, and look at how well you turned out. I was 40 years old at the time and had no idea I was adopted before that moment. I was stunned. I told her I had to go get some work done and quickly left. About a week later, when I was back in that office to pick something up for a couple of guys I supervise, her husband came to pick her up from work. She introduced me to him as the one, insert my mother's name here, adopted. I just shook his hand, picked up what I came there to get, and left in a hurry again. I haven't brought it up to anyone in my family at all, partially because I'm hoping it's just not true, and partially because I don't think it would make any real difference now at 43. My parents are the ones who raised me and sacrificed to give me a great life, regardless of the biology of the situation. It does feel weird now, though. There's this little internal hitch when I say mom or dad that I can't help. Story 16. My friend in grade school told me that her parents were getting divorced, and when she was with her dad, he always made comments about how much she looked like her mom. She said he made her feel like he was trying to use her to replace her mom. I told my mom, and after that, I remember my friend saying that the school counselor started checking in with her and that her visits with her dad became supervised. I assumed it had been taken care of because of my mom. 30-some years later, it came up in a family conversation, and my mom didn't even remember me telling her, let alone reporting it to the school. That means my mom heard that story from me about my friend and brushed it off. Thank goodness my friend apparently reached out to someone else who took it seriously. Story 17. My grandma was always very mean to my aunt. Even as a kid, something about the situation seemed so off. My grandpa died when his kids were teenagers, and my aunt would tell me how close she was to him. I gathered that my grandma was jealous of that. On top of that, my grandma was just a cold person, while my aunt was always more emotional, so my grandma would say and do the cruelest things when it came to her. She once told my aunt to get over it after she found out she had a miscarriage. A couple of years ago, while my aunt was slowly drinking herself to death, she let it slip, Why my grandma didn't like her. My grandpa had been shipped overseas when they were kids, and when he came back, he took all the kids out for ice cream and asked how they had been. As a little kid, my aunt rambled on about everything and then mentioned that they hadn't seen their mom's friend lately, the friend who used to come over and spend the night. Without realizing it, she had revealed that my grandma was having an affair. My understanding is that my grandma and grandpa's relationship never recovered after that. He died a few years later, and my grandma held it over my aunt's head for the rest of her life. My aunt was already struggling from losing my grandpa, and my grandma treating her horribly over an innocent childhood mistake played a major role in what led to my aunt's alcoholism and eventual death. I always had a bond with my grandma, but after learning that, I couldn't look at my memories of her the same way. Story 18. A few years back, my half-uncle, his wife, and their two kids very abruptly packed up and left their home to live abroad. I overheard my dad discussing it with my mom. The real reason was that my uncle had a nervous breakdown. I think it was a narcissistic rage where he completely trashed their home, broke a bunch of things, screamed, and was horrible to his wife and kids. They eventually managed to sell the house and are now living in Europe off the money from it. Neither of them works, the money will eventually run out, and no one knows what he's going to do. Story 19. Decades ago, I moved to Toronto and into a rooming house. A guy from Nova Scotia moved in too, new to the city. We were having beers one night when he got this sad look on his face, looked at the ground, and said, "I wish they would forgive me. I didn't mean to do it." I asked him, "Luke, what are you talking about?" He replied, "I didn't mean to burn the church down." I happened to meet another guy who knew Luke from his tiny fishing village, which had a population of about 300. He said Luke had been playing with matches as a teenager and accidentally burned down the town's only church. He was run out of town and permanently banished. Story 20. As an engineering student, my slum landlord was a food broker. He would come over sometimes to collect the rent, and we'd talk for a while before he left. One day, he casually mentioned that several major grocery chains had asked him to design and develop an olive oil that they could sell at a high profit. Normally, it would have been a boring conversation until he let it slip that it was basically 95% canola oil mixed with 5% olive oil at a plant in Canada and then bottled for major grocery chains in the US. He basically said that American consumers were too stupid to know the difference, and it turns out he was absolutely right. Story 21. My dad keeps giving suspicious answers about what he did in the army during Vietnam. He didn't see combat because his mom pressured him to learn how to type in high school. He did intake at a military hospital. This Father's Day, I mentioned that he probably saw a lot of war injuries while he was in the military, considering he worked in a military hospital. He seemed confused and asked what I meant. Then he said he only had to walk through the hospital to get to where he worked. My guy, what the actual hell was your job? Not exactly a confession, but the more he says about it, the more suspicious it gets. Story 22? It wasn't exactly a dark secret, but it was definitely a well-hidden one. I had a coworker who everyone assumed was straight. There were no signs otherwise, and he came from a very traditional family. Rumors eventually started that he was dating a guy in another department. Not long after, he and I were alone in a room preparing for an office event. I think he was just exhausted from pretending. He didn't say anything explicitly, but his whole demeanor changed, and he just acted like himself. I had never seen him like that before. He completely let his guard down, and maybe he felt comfortable with me. Years later, he officially came out and is now openly dating men. Looking back, I realize how hard it must have been for him to carry that around every day. I honestly felt so relieved and happy for him. Story 23. My mom once got super mad at me for taking my sister's side over something and screamed, "She's not even your full sister," at me. Then she covered her mouth. Her eyes went wide, and she never said anything about it again. I was only around 8 years old. My sister and I look nothing alike. We're total opposites. I favor my dad, who is supposed to be her dad too, obviously, and she favors our mom's side, but I don't know. I've never told my sister or my dad. My mom and dad have been separated since we were very young. Story 24. Due to her illness, my ex was supposed to undergo a kidney transplant. Her parents provided blood samples, not knowing that DNA sequencing would also be performed. My ex found out that she was the love child of her father and his then mistress. She also discovered that she had a twin brother. She had been adopted by her father's family when she was 3 years old. Her brother stayed with their biological mother, and they were living only a few kilometers away from her. She then connected the dots about why her mother never truly cared for her and always favored her older sister. Story 25. Ah man, too many to recall. I have a trusting face or demeanor or something. People tell me all the time. I've never said this to anyone before. A fairly recent and bigger one was last year. I was volunteering at a meditation retreat, and a woman confided in me that she regretted having her children. We had been volunteering together and talking for a few days, and eventually she just kind of blurted it out. She started by asking if I had children and seemed somewhat relieved when I said no. She went on to say that she would give anything to go back and start her life over again without children. Other big ones were former military members talking about terrible things that happened during their careers. Story 26. I went out onto the patio of a bar and found a very pregnant and obviously intoxicated girl sitting there, smoking a cigarette and crying. When I asked if she was okay, she said she was freaking out because she was about to have a baby and didn't know which one of the local police officers was the father. She said she had been picked up late one drunken night and ended up having an intimate encounter with several officers. Years later, I saw her and her son at a karate demonstration that my son was participating in. The kid seemed pretty healthy. I wonder if she ever figured out who the father was. Story 27. I was sharing my 23andMe results with my dad. I was really curious about my DNA ancestry because I come from a very racially and culturally mixed family with heritage from across the world. My results did reflect some genetic diversity. However, one thing stood out to me. I tested as 75% ethnically Asian, primarily Chinese, Indonesian, and a mix of other Southeast Asian ethnicities. It seemed a little odd because, as far as I was aware, I should have been closer to 50% Asian since my mother is Asian and my father is part white, part black, and part indigenous American, with little to no known Asian heritage. I initially chalked it up to inaccuracies and test-to-test variation. But when I shared my results with my dad, he got really quiet and serious. He told me that a long time ago my grandmother was essayed at a nightclub by an Asian man. Suddenly a few things clicked into place for me. Why my dad was so light-skinned despite having a black father. Why neither my sister nor I developed curly hair. To be fair, these traits can occur naturally in African populations, but then why the 75% Asian result? My father never brought up this revelation again. As far as we are concerned, only my black granddad is considered family. Story 28. A really arrogant young comedian, the kind of guy who got the tiniest bit of success and used it to torment people he thought were beneath him, was trying out a new bit at an open mic. The joke was about how he lost his job at Ross, so now he does cam modeling from home. He talked about how annoying it was to perform on camera and how any job can eventually become something you hate. While he was doing the bit, all of the other comedians in the room were looking at each other like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. One guy was too loud and said, "So he's a cam girl, like he twerks for cash?" You could see the arrogant comedian's face drop as he realized this probably wasn't something he should be telling a room full of people whose main goal is to make fun of others. He wrapped up the bit pretty quickly and got off stage. I've seen him post here on Reddit before, so if you're reading this, Connor, you're a douche and you're the biggest jerk I've ever met. At least you made a career out of it. Story 29. When I was in college, someone threw a homemade incendiary device into a store during an annual event that got out of hand on the very street where I lived as a student. Fast forward 30 years later, and I'm working at my alma mater. During an after-work event involving alcohol, I was talking about that fateful day. One of the administrators, who had a bit too much to drink, confessed in a moment when we were speaking alone that they were the person who created and threw the device. This person had spent their entire career making up for that youthful mistake by creating an environment on campus where all students could find help if they were struggling, depressed, angry, or in trouble. Even after learning they were the reason the campus lost that annual event, I still admire this particular person for the work they've done to help our students succeed. I don't know if they realized they confessed. Story 30. A couple of years ago, my mom casually brought up in conversation that my grandma on my dad's side had attempted self-harm, and then immediately moved on to the next topic like it was something we all already knew. This was my first time hearing about it, so I just sat there in shock thinking, dang, you can't just drop a bomb like that and then move on. Since she had never told me before, I assumed it happened before I was born, but I didn't want to ask any follow-up questions, so I wasn't sure. A few months later, I was going through boxes of my stuff in my parents' garage and came across a notebook from second grade. In this notebook, we wrote an entry at the start of each school day about something we did the day before. I flipped to a random page and read the craziest words I had ever seen. I saw Shrek 2 on Sunday. My grandma tried to off herself. Apparently, I knew the whole time. I have zero recollection of my parents telling me when it happened, but I guess they did, and my brain just repressed the memory. It was only accidentally revealed to me because my mom thought I already knew. Anyway, she was about 85 when I was in second grade, and it breaks my heart to think of her trying to off herself at that age. I'll ask my mom more about it if it ever comes up again, but for now I'm just going to leave it. And while it's incredibly sad, that journal entry is unfortunately one of the funniest things I own. Story 31. A girl messaged me on MySpace who lived in the same town to tell me I was cute. I was an emo boy back then. We started chatting and went on a date at the beach where we drank vodka and orange juice. The night developed into a one-night stand, but in the middle of it she stopped and unloaded about how her grandfather had abused her all her life, and that she was currently in a court battle trying to prove it. It came out of nowhere and obviously killed the mood, so I just spent the night with her and listened. She thanked me in the morning and we never saw each other again. Story 32. When I was 20, my dad let it slip that he had been married before he married my mom, which revealed something much darker. When I finally sat down and put all the pieces together now that I had this new information, his life story always seemed very believable until it came to when he switched from academia to industry. His best friend from college confessed that he was in love with my dad while my dad was married to his first wife. My dad basically told him that he loved him too, but that he wasn't gay and didn't love him in that way. My dad's best friend hung himself shortly afterward. My dad couldn't forgive himself and left his career in academia, mainly because everyone else had known that this guy was obviously in love with my dad. My dad went from being dean of admissions at a major, extremely competitive East Coast university to starting over from scratch because he couldn't be around the people who knew what had happened. Story 33. My friend, her husband, and I were in the car driving home after she and I had finished a run. He told this hilarious story where he could not stop laughing about being in school as a child. He said that at his school, the special needs kids were made to participate in PE. He loved dodgeball, where he would hurl a ball at a kid in a wheelchair who would scream out like a bird. He and his friends would crack up over making the kid scream. They even had a nickname for the kid that involved something related to birds. It was at that moment I knew my instincts about him were correct and that I should always trust my gut. Story 34. I was born in a border city before moving to a Midwestern state. When I was in my 20s, I worked at a fast food restaurant. A new coworker started working there, and as a crew trainer, I taught him everything about the job. I've been told by people that I have a very calming demeanor, and most people tend to warm up to me because of it. Well, my coworker admitted one day that he crossed the border and delivered drugs to certain individuals. He would often recruit other people he worked with to do the same thing for extra cash. Cue the uneasy feeling, and me listening to him actually tell me that he had attempted to ask the assistant to the general manager for help. She was someone I worked with a lot. Smart, quirky, but definitely not stupid. She turned him down and didn't want to hear him out fully once he brought up going across the border. It really wasn't difficult since all you needed to do was cross a bridge downtown, and suddenly you were in Mexico. She reported him to our boss. My boss essentially blew her off. Mind you, he literally called in one day and said, "What for?" Cops had shown up at his house with a warrant. He couldn't come in because they were searching the place. He eventually did get fired because he showed up to work high. The franchise owner of the restaurant happened to show up. This guy walked up with a tablet and approached the owner. He outlined how he could do a much better job than my boss. The owner simply nodded and smiled at him, then told my boss about their friendly exchange. She apparently yelled at him, told him to clock out and to essentially get out. It's a pity I didn't see that unfold, but I was waiting to clock in when I noticed him talking to the owner. I came in after the fallout. My boss looked completely distraught for the rest of the day. I really don't know why she kept him despite all the red flags. But you live and learn, I suppose. Story 35. I dated this guy a really long time ago, and things were great between us until it got to the "what are we" stage. He was clearly distraught about why he couldn't tell me the reason he didn't want a serious relationship. Then he stammered out, through tears, that he was gay. We ended up parting ways fairly soon after that conversation, as you can imagine. Several years went by, and he reached out to reconnect and catch up on life. We got coffee, and he said to me, "I just wanted to reach out and connect and figured we could move past the talking crap about each other." Apparently, he had been bad-mouthing me to most, if not all, of our mutual friends and professional acquaintances. I was really surprised by this because I hadn't uttered his name once since we broke up, and our separation had been amicable. He admitted that he only told me he was gay so he could end things without hurting me because he was too young to want anything serious at the time. Okay, it became apparent to me that he had been bad-mouthing me to all our mutuals because he was preemptively trying to stop anything I might have said about him being gay. Which again, I never told a soul. Well, since then, he got married to a woman and had a couple of kids. He was seen as a pillar of his community and was very well respected among our professional networks. And then somehow he ended up divorced. After the divorce, he started coloring and growing out his hair. Then he started wearing foundation and concealer, getting his brows shaped, and eventually started using they/them pronouns. The last I heard, someone had screenshots of his dating profile that showed him wearing makeup and included content implying he might be bi. Now, I do kind of wish I had told everyone he was gay 20 years ago just so I could say, "I told you so. You heard it here first." Story 36. We were on holiday without my dad when my mom invited her friends, a husband and wife, to stay over. My siblings and I went to sleep before they were due to arrive. As far as I'm aware, they never turned up, but I remember waking up to find my mom in lingerie, talking on the phone in the spare room she had prepared for them. A few months later, my parents' marriage began to spectacularly fall apart. Looking back, things hadn't been right for over a year by then. I heard my dad on the phone venting to his sister-in-law, my mom's older sister. I crept closer to the master bedroom door to hear better. He mentioned catching my mom flirting with someone in a way she had never done with him. He also mentioned holding a knife to her. That's as much as I heard before I was caught by my mom. I was grilled about what I had overheard, but I flat out denied hearing anything I didn't already know. I was about 10 years old. I've never brought this up with anyone, including my siblings. I don't know if my memory or my interpretation of things was accurate. Was it lingerie, or was it just underwear, which wasn't uncommon for her to wear around us during the heat of summer? Was he recounting an actual incident? Or was he sharing an intrusive thought? It's been nearly 20 years since then. I don't know what digging any of this up would achieve, So instead, I keep those memories hidden deep. Story 37. I gave a dinner party for a couple around 20 years ago. We had plenty of alcohol, and the man took advantage of it. Around halfway through, he started talking about self-harm like it was nothing. I was listening, wondering why that came up, but I also remembered the earlier conversation about depression. The alcohol prevented the connection from clicking in my mind. Later, he was slurring pretty badly when he said he would pull the trigger downstairs, and his wife would be upstairs and run to find him after calling emergency services. I thought he was writing a novel, and we ended the night around 3 in the morning. I completely forgot about that conversation until I heard through the grapevine that the exact scene had happened, and that was when I remembered it. She collected his life insurance. Story 38. So about 8 years ago, my dad had cancer, and the tumor was really impacting him day to day. He had times when he got emotional but would just say he was fine whenever we asked if he was okay. He was not an emotional person outwardly. So anyways, we were eating breakfast, and he said he loved us kids. My sister and I are adopted, and was so glad he got to be our dad. I said I was glad he was our dad too, and then he proceeded to tell me that he and my mom had tried to have kids, which we already knew, and they lost 6 little babies. He did tear up, and we just ate in silence until I had to take him to his radiation treatment. My sister doesn't know, and my mom has never said anything other than that she and my dad couldn't have kids, so they adopted us. He died about 9 months later. I don't know if he ever told anyone else in our family. Less dark was when I learned I was a secret to some of my birth family. They had no idea I existed until about 2 years ago. They believed my birth mom had only been with her husband and had my half-brother. My grandparents knew and my brothers knew, but nobody outside their family knew. Over the course of one brunch, I learned I had 2 uncles, 2 aunts, and 5 cousins who didn't know I existed, despite living across town. Story 39. There's this one gossip or spy aunt in our colony who just roams around entering other people's homes and collecting gossip. So whenever my parents left to go to my grandmother's house, they would pass by the spy lady's home, and she would immediately rush over to our place, knowing I would be alone at home. She came over with her 4-year-old grandson and used him as an excuse, saying he asked to come and see you. I don't exactly remember how it unfolded, but I was told by this aunt that on that day my mother had a son. That meant I had an older brother. He died very young, and I was told that my mother and father cried a lot. I had never heard anything about this from either of my parents before. I haven't brought it up to this day. I just don't want to open a deep wound that might not have even healed yet, or rather, one that may never fully heal. Story 40. When I was in middle school, I overheard my mom talking about her boss at the deli where she worked. He had been caught by his wife having an affair in the deli while it was closed with the mother of a girl I went to school with, and now they were all getting divorced. From what I recall, I think drugs may have been involved too. For a while after it happened, the girl tried to play it off at school that her parents were still together, but most people knew they were getting a divorce and made fun of her for lying. I never told a single person about the affair or the deli because my family had a lot going on too, and it made me feel better knowing that other people had skeletons in their closets. I have no idea if she ever found out about the deli. I hope for her sake she never did. Story 41. I came to know a family secret through my cousin that my parents never let the 4 of us children know. My father has 4 brothers. He himself was the second youngest, and he has a younger brother. We are a close-knit family, very attached to all of my cousins and uncles, except we never met our youngest uncle while growing up. Even though my father would often talk about his bond with him while they were growing up, we had just accepted the fact that our youngest uncle existed and was married, settled, and had 3 children. Somehow, we just never met them because they were in a different country. Turns out, and this gets very messy, that this uncle was previously married to my cousin's mother's sister. In other words, my aunt's sister was married to my youngest uncle. Apparently, that uncle treated her poorly and was a horrible husband, so she left and filed for divorce. We had always stayed in touch with my aunt's sister, and she truly is a wonderful woman. Meanwhile, my uncle refused to stay in touch with his brothers because they chose to side with my aunt's sister. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.